The scream pierced through the concrete walls of the abandoned warehouse, followed by the thunderous crash of bodies hitting steel. Inside, what looked like a simple training exercise had turned into something nobody could explain. A woman they had mocked just minutes before now moved through the building like smoke through shadows, clearing room after room with a precision that defied everything they thought they knew about combat. The instructors who had laughed at her plain clothes and quiet demeanor now watched their monitors in stunned silence, their most elite students dropping one by one to someone who hadn't even raised her voice above a whisper. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Vanguard Tactical Training Center occupied an entire city block in downtown Detroit, its glass facade reflecting the gray October sky like armor plating. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished concrete floors and walls lined with photographs of graduates who had gone on to serve in elite military units, private security firms, and law enforcement agencies across the globe. The reception desk bore the company logo in brushed steel letters, and behind it, a receptionist in tactical pants and a fitted black polo shirt processed new arrivals with military efficiency. Elena Vasquez pushed through the heavy glass doors just as the morning briefing was about to begin. She wore faded jeans, worn sneakers that had seen better days, and a simple gray sweatshirt that hung loose around her small frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried nothing but a small canvas messenger bag slung across her shoulder. At 32, she could have been mistaken for a college student running late to class, not someone who had paid the hefty enrollment fee for Vanguard's intensive urban combat certification program. The lobby buzzed with the low conversations of other participants, most of whom looked like they had stepped out of a tactical gear catalog. Men in moisture-wicking shirts stretched over muscled frames, women in form-fitting athletic wear that announced their gym memberships to expensive fitness clubs. Cargo pants, tactical boots, and expensive watches seemed to be the unofficial uniform. Several participants wore shirts from previous military or police training programs, their conversations peppered with acronyms and jargon that marked them as professionals in the field. Marcus Chun, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, stood near the elevator bank reviewing a tablet. His black instructor polo bore the Vanguard logo and his name embroidered in silver thread. Behind him, two assistant instructors in similar attire discussed the day's scenarios in hushed tones. When Marcus looked up and scanned the gathered group, his gaze passed over Elena entirely before settling on a former Marine, whose posture and bearing immediately identified him as someone worth noting. A woman in expensive athletic wear leaned toward her companion, nodding in Elena's direction. Did someone's girlfriend get lost trying to find the yoga studio? She whispered loud enough for several people nearby to hear. Her companion, a man whose tactical pants and boots probably cost more than Elena's entire outfit, chuckled and shook his head. Maybe she's here for the first aid course. They probably offer that for civilians. Near the windows, a group of 3 men examined their gear bags, pulling out knee pads, gloves, and other protective equipment with the casual familiarity of people who own such things. One of them, a tall man with close-cropped hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, noticed Elena standing quietly near the back of the group. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. "You sure you're in the right place? The community college is about 6 blocks that way." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly, but it carried the casual dismissiveness of people who had never doubted their place in spaces like this. Elena didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that she had heard. She simply stood with her hands at her sides, her gaze focused somewhere in the middle distance, as if she were listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. Marcus finally addressed the group, his voice cutting through the chatter with military precision. Welcome to Vanguard Tactical Training Center. Over the next 5 days, you'll be put through scenarios designed to test and develop your urban combat capabilities. This isn't a game, and it isn't a fitness program. The situations you'll face here mirror real-world threats that our graduates encounter in the field every day. He gestured toward a wall display showing floor plans of various building layouts. You'll work individually and in teams to clear structures, neutralize threats, and accomplish mission objectives under stress. Some of you have military or law enforcement backgrounds. Some of you work private security. Some of you. His eyes found Elena for the first time, and he paused, are here for personal development. The way he said the last part drew another round of quiet chuckles. A woman near the front raised her hand. What if someone realizes they're in over their head? Is there a way to step down to an easier program? The question was clearly directed at Elena, though the woman didn't look at her directly. Marcus nodded. We have civilian self-defense courses that might be more appropriate for participants who find the full program challenging. No shame in knowing your limits. This time he did look at Elena, his expression not unkind but clearly suggesting that she might want to consider her options. The first assistant instructor, a woman whose biceps strained against her polo shirt sleeves, stepped forward. Before we head upstairs to the staging area, let's do quick introductions. Name, background, and what brings you to Vanguard. She pointed to the former Marine, who straightened and spoke with the crisp cadence of someone accustomed to briefings. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, recently separated from the Corps, looking to transition into private security work. His introduction was met with approving nods from several participants. The introductions continued around the group. Former police officers, current security personnel, military veterans, and civilians who owned businesses or lived in areas where they felt they needed advanced self-protection skills. Each person spoke with confidence about their background and goals, their voices carrying the weight of experience or at least the conviction that they belonged in this environment. When the introductions reached Elena, the room fell quieter than it had been for any of the previous speakers. She stood without changing her posture, her voice soft but clear. Elena Vasquez. I'm here to learn. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Someone in the back cleared their throat. Another person shifted their weight, gear rustling softly. Marcus waited a moment longer, clearly expecting more, then moved. On to the next person. That's it. The tall man who had made the community college comment asked. No background, no reason? His tone wasn't hostile, but it carried the edge of someone who had earned his place through demonstrated competence and expected others to do the same. Elena looked at him for the first time since entering the building. Her gaze was steady, not challenging, but not submissive either. I'm here to learn, she repeated, and something in her tone suggested that was all the explanation anyone was going to get. The assistant instructor glanced at Marcus, who made a note on his tablet, and nodded toward the elevators. All right. Everyone upstairs to the staging area. We'll start with individual assessments so we can establish baseline capabilities. As the group moved toward the elevators, conversations resumed in small clusters. Elena found herself walking alone, the natural buffer of space around her, making it clear that she had been categorized as someone not quite part of the group. Behind her, she could hear fragments of discussion. $5,000 for the full program, and they let anyone with a credit card sign up. Liability, nightmare waiting to happen. At least it'll be entertaining. The elevator was crowded, pressing the participants together in a way that made the social dynamics more obvious. Elena stood near the back, her small stature making her nearly invisible among the larger frames around her. The conversation flowed over her head, literally and figuratively, as the others discussed their expectations for the program and shared stories from their professional backgrounds. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, They revealed a space that looked like a cross between a military training facility and a movie set. The main area was divided into different zones, each designed to simulate a specific environment. There was a section made up like apartment corridors, complete with doors and realistic lighting. Another area resembled an office building, with cubicles and conference rooms. A third zone was configured as a warehouse space with shipping containers and industrial equipment. Along one wall, monitors displayed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the training areas. Marcus led the group to a briefing area with chairs arranged in rows facing a large screen. Before we start the practical exercises, we need to establish where everyone stands in terms of basic capabilities. We'll begin with individual assessments in our standard room clearing scenario. He clicked a remote, and the screen showed a floor plan of a simple apartment layout. Single-story residential unit, 3 rooms plus a bathroom. Your mission is to enter, clear the space of threats, and secure any civilians present. You'll be armed with training weapons that fire marking rounds, and our role players will be equipped with similar gear. Hits are registered electronically, so there's no ambiguity about contact. A hand went up from the front row. What about protective gear? Body armor, helmets, and eye protection are mandatory. We have equipment available for those who didn't bring their own. Marcus gestured toward an equipment area where tactical vests and helmets were arranged on racks. Who goes first? Asked the woman who had made the yoga studio comment earlier. We'll start with volunteers, Marcus replied. Anyone eager to show us what they've got? Several hands went up immediately, but Elena's wasn't among them. She sat in the back row, her messenger bag in her lap, watching as the first volunteer was selected and briefed on the specific scenario parameters. The first participant, a former police officer named Davis, took nearly 20 minutes to gear up and receive final instructions. Elena watched him check his equipment with practiced efficiency, adjusting straps and testing the electronic systems that would register hits during the exercise. His movements were confident and methodical, those of someone who had done similar preparations many times before. When Davis entered the training area, his progress was displayed on the monitors for the rest of the group to observe. He moved with textbook precision, pieing corners and communicating with the imaginary team members that would have accompanied him in a real scenario. His technique was solid, if somewhat slow, and he successfully identified and neutralized the threats while securing the civilian role players. Good foundation work, Marcus commented as Davis emerged from the exercise area. Room for improvement in terms of speed and fluidity, but you clearly have experience with building clearing procedures. The next several participants produced similar results. Competent but unremarkable performances that demonstrated varying levels of training and experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Some moved faster but missed details. Others were thorough but slow. A few made tactical errors that would have been costly in real situations, but none performed poorly enough to raise questions about their place in the program. By the time half the group had completed their assessments, a pattern had emerged. The former military and law enforcement personnel performed best, as expected. The civilians with security backgrounds were competent, but less polished. Those who were newer to tactical training showed enthusiasm but lacked the refined technique that came from professional experience. Elena's name appeared closer to the end of the list, and as her turn approached, the energy in the observation area shifted. Conversations that had been focused on analyzing technique and offering constructive criticism became more centered on speculation about what they were about to witness. This should be interesting, someone muttered. Think she'll even make it through the door? Maybe they'll let her use the practice weapon on the lowest setting. Marcus called her name, and Elena rose from her chair without hurry. She approached the equipment area where an assistant instructor waited to help her select protective gear. The body armor hung loose on her small frame, and the helmet seemed almost comically large. She made no adjustments, no attempts to customize the fit or appearance. She simply put on what was handed to her and picked up the training weapon with the same casual acceptance. Any questions about the scenario parameters? The assistant instructor asked. You'll be entering through the front door, and you need to clear all rooms and secure any civilians you encounter. The electronic systems will register any hits you take, and the exercise ends when you've either completed the mission or been eliminated. Elena nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that she had heard and understood. Take your time with the briefing area outside the door, the instructor continued. Use whatever planning time you need to visualize your approach. As Elena walked toward the exercise area entrance, the observation room fell into a different kind of quiet than it had for previous participants. This wasn't the focused attention of people watching a colleague demonstrate their skills. This was the anticipatory hush of spectators waiting for something unexpected to happen, though none of them could have articulated what they expected to see. Marcus positioned himself at the central monitor station where he could observe Elena's progress and communicate with the role players inside the training area. His finger hovered over the timer controls, ready to begin the assessment that everyone assumed would be over almost as soon as it started. Elena stood outside the entrance to the training area, the oversized helmet making her look even smaller than she already was. Through the one-way glass, the observers could see her lips moving slightly, as if she were speaking to someone only she could hear. She wasn't reviewing tactical procedures or psyching herself up for the challenge ahead. She was simply standing there, breathing slowly, her eyes closed as if she were listening to distant music. Is she meditating? Someone asked, the question carrying a mix of amusement and disbelief. Maybe she's praying, came another voice. Marcus frowned at his stopwatch. Most participants use the planning time to review their approach or visualize the building layout. Elena seemed to be doing neither. After nearly 3 minutes of stillness, he activated the intercom. Miss Vasquez, you can begin whenever you're ready. Elena's eyes opened, and she looked directly at the camera mounted above the entrance door. For a moment, her gaze seemed to focus not on the lens, but on something beyond it, as if she could see through the equipment to the people watching her. Then she nodded once and placed her hand on the door handle. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward, though none of the witnesses would ever be able to adequately explain what they had seen. Elena didn't burst through the door with aggressive speed, nor did she enter with the careful precision that had characterized the other participants. She simply opened the door and walked inside as if she were coming home after a long day. The first room was supposed to contain 2 hostile role players, positioned to create a crossfire scenario for anyone entering through the main door. Elena's approach should have triggered immediate engagement from both positions. Instead, she moved through the space like water flowing around obstacles, her path taking her past both positions without either role player getting a clear shot. It wasn't that she was moving particularly fast or that she had somehow identified their locations in advance. She simply wasn't where they expected her to be when they expected her to be there. The electronic hit registration system remained silent. In the observation room, Marcus leaned forward toward his monitors, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused attention. What the hell is she doing? He muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Elena had already moved into the second room, where a more complex scenario waited. 3 role players were positioned to simulate a hostage situation, with 1 civilian and 2 hostiles arranged so that any rescue attempt would require precise timing and positioning to avoid hitting the innocent party. Standard procedure called for careful observation, planning, and coordinated movement to neutralize the threats while protecting the civilian. Elena entered the room, and everything changed. Her movement through the space wasn't tactical in any conventional sense. She didn't take cover, didn't communicate with imaginary team members, didn't even appear to be aiming her weapon with any particular precision. Yet somehow both hostile role-players found themselves marked as eliminated while the civilian remained unharmed. The electronic systems registered 2 clean hits on targets that should have been nearly impossible to engage without extensive preparation. How did she? One of the observers began, then trailed off as they realized they couldn't finish the question in any way that made sense. The third room presented the most complex challenge of the assessment. It was designed as a maze of furniture and obstacles, with multiple role-players positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would force any participant to use cover effectively and move with extreme care. Most of the previous participants had spent several minutes in this room, working methodically through the space and accepting that they would likely take at least 1 or 2 hits in the process of clearing it. Elena was through the room in less than 30 seconds. The electronic systems registered 4 eliminations and 0 hits on Elena. The role-players, all of whom were experienced instructors accustomed to challenging even the most skilled participants, emerged from their positions looking confused and slightly shaken. Marcus stood up from his monitoring station, his eyes fixed on the displays that showed Elena moving through the final bathroom area with the same inexplicable fluidity she had demonstrated throughout the exercise. The elapsed time on his stopwatch showed 2 minutes and 18 seconds from entry to completion. The previous best time had been just over 7 minutes, achieved by a former Special Forces operator who had moved through the scenario with aggressive speed at the cost of taking multiple hits. Elena had completed the exercise faster than anyone else and without taking a single hit. In the observation area, the silence was profound. 23 experienced participants and 3 professional instructors watched Elena emerge from the exercise area with the same quiet composure she had shown going in. She began removing the protective equipment with no particular urgency, setting each piece aside with the same casual efficiency she had shown putting it on. "Technical malfunction," someone finally said, the words falling into the quiet like stones dropped in still water. "Has to be. The hit registration system must have glitched." Marcus was already moving toward the exercise area, his tablet in hand as he called up the detailed logs from the electronic monitoring systems. Behind him, conversations began to bubble up as the observers tried to process what they thought they had seen. "No way that was real. She got lucky. Right place, right time. The role-players must have missed their marks. Equipment failure. Only explanation that makes sense." But even as they offered these rational explanations, something in the tone of their voices suggested that none of them fully believed what they were saying. They had all watched the monitors. They had all seen Elena move through spaces that should have been impossible to navigate without taking fire. They had watched her eliminate targets with shots that shouldn't have been possible from the positions she had occupied. Marcus spent 15 minutes checking every system, reviewing every log entry, and interviewing each of the role-players who had participated in Elena's assessment. The equipment had functioned perfectly. The role-players had engaged according to their briefings and confirmed that their shots had simply missed their intended target. The electronic hit registration system had recorded exactly what had happened, impossible as it seemed. When Marcus returned to the observation area, Elena was sitting in the back row again, her messenger bag in her lap, waiting quietly as she had before her turn. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour earlier, showing no signs of exertion or excitement from what should have been an intensely challenging experience. Marcus cleared his throat, a sound that immediately focused every person's attention on him. "Miss Vasquez's assessment results are..." He paused, consulting his tablet as if the numbers might have changed since he last looked at them. "Exceptional. Fastest completion time by a significant margin, with perfect accuracy and 0 hits taken. The silence that followed was different from the quiet that had preceded Elena's assessment. This wasn't anticipation or casual dismissal. This was the heavy stillness of people trying to reconcile what they had witnessed with everything they thought they knew about how such things were supposed to work. Finally, the tall man who had made the community college comment earlier spoke up. "I'd like to see that again." "Maybe we could review the footage?" Marcus nodded slowly. "We can certainly do that during the debrief session." He looked around the room, taking in the expressions of confusion, skepticism, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "For now, let's continue with the remaining assessments. We still have several participants to evaluate." But the energy in the room had shifted fundamentally. The casual confidence that had characterized the morning had given way to something more uncertain. Elena remained in her chair, unchanged and apparently unbothered by the attention her performance had generated. She simply sat and waited, as if extraordinary results were exactly what anyone should expect from someone who was there to learn. The remaining assessments proceeded, but the observers' attention was divided. Part of their focus remained on evaluating their fellow participants, but another part kept drifting back to Elena, studying her as if they might find some clue that would explain what they had witnessed. She gave them nothing to work with. No hints, no demonstrations of hidden knowledge or capabilities, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. She was simply there, quiet and unremarkable, carrying whatever secrets had allowed her to move through their most challenging scenario like it was an empty room. As the morning session concluded and the group prepared to break for lunch, conversations buzzed with speculation and analysis. Technical explanations were proposed and discarded. Theories about luck and coincidence were offered and debated. But underneath all the rational discussion was a growing awareness that they had witnessed something that didn't fit into any of their familiar categories. Elena gathered her messenger bag and stood to leave with the rest of the group, her movements as unremarkable as ever. But now, as she walked toward the elevator, the buffer of space around her had taken on a different quality. It wasn't the dismissive exclusion of earlier in the morning. It was something closer to respect, tinged with uncertainty and the growing suspicion that they had all badly misjudged exactly who Elena Vasquez was and what she was capable of. The afternoon would bring team exercises and more complex scenarios. But the simple assessment that was supposed to establish baseline capabilities had already established something else entirely. Elena had announced herself quietly and without explanation as someone who operated by different rules than the rest of them understood. And she had done it all without raising her voice above a whisper. The lunch break stretched longer than scheduled as Marcus huddled with his assistant instructors in a corner conference room, their voices low but animated. Through the glass walls, the participants could see tablet screens being passed back and forth, footage being reviewed frame by frame, and increasingly frustrated gestures as the instructors tried to make sense of what their monitoring systems had recorded. Elena sat alone at a table near the windows, methodically eating a simple sandwich she had brought from home. Around her, clusters of participants engaged in intense discussions about the morning's events, their voices carrying fragments of speculation and analysis. The consensus seemed to be forming around equipment malfunction or some kind of elaborate setup, but the certainty in their voices carried an undertone of doubt that hadn't been there before. "I've run that exact scenario probably 50 times, said Davis, the former police officer who had gone first in the assessments. "There's no way to clear it that fast without taking hits. The angles don't work, the timing doesn't work, something was off." Torres, the ex-Marine, nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "I watched her movement pattern on the monitors. She wasn't using any tactical doctrine I've ever seen. No slicing the pie, no contact drills, no fire and movement. She just flowed through the space." "Exactly," interrupted the tall man who had made the community college comment earlier. His name was Brennan, and his background included both military service and private security contracting. Real operators don't move like that. Real combat isn't some kind of dance. You either follow proven procedures or you get killed. A woman named Sarah, whose athletic wear and confident bearing suggested serious fitness training, leaned forward across her table. Maybe she's had some kind of specialized training we haven't heard of. Foreign military programs maybe, or some private instruction from high-level operators. Then why not mention it during introductions? Brennan asked. Everyone else talked about their background. If she's got some elite training, why keep it secret? Elena continued eating her sandwich, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was the subject of every conversation in the room. Her messenger bag sat beside her chair, still containing whatever mysterious contents she had brought. Unlike the other participants, she hadn't unpacked tactical gear, reference materials, or even a water bottle. She had simply arrived with her small bag and seemed to need nothing else. Marcus finally emerged from the conference room, his expression carefully neutral but with tension visible around his eyes. He approached the center of the dining area and raised his voice to address the group. All right, everyone, let's get back to work. This afternoon we're moving to our advanced building clearing exercise. He gestured toward a different bank of elevators than they had used in the morning. The scenario is more complex than the individual assessments. You'll be working in teams to clear a multi-story structure with unknown numbers of hostiles and civilians. The building layout is based on real-world architecture, and the scenarios are designed to test your ability to adapt to changing conditions. As the group gathered their belongings and moved toward the elevators, Marcus continued his briefing. Teams will be randomly assigned, and each team will face a different variant of the base scenario. Communication, coordination, and tactical discipline will be essential for success. The elevator rose to the 7th floor, where the doors opened to reveal something that looked more like a movie set than a training facility. The space had been constructed as a realistic 3-story building interior, complete with staircases, multiple rooms on each level, and working electrical systems. Cameras were mounted discreetly throughout the structure, and the walls were reinforced to handle the impact of training weapons and the movement of participants in full gear. Elena found herself assigned to Team C, along with Brennan, Sarah, and a quiet man named Rodriguez, who had identified himself as a current federal agent during the morning introductions. The team composition seemed almost deliberately designed to create tension, pairing Elena with 3 participants who had already demonstrated both competence and skepticism about her morning performance. Before we start, Marcus announced to all the teams, let me explain the parameters. This is a hostage rescue scenario. Unknown number of civilians are being held somewhere in the building by an unknown number of hostiles. Your mission is to enter, locate and secure the civilians, neutralize the threats, and extract safely. He pointed to monitors showing feeds from cameras positioned throughout the structure. Unlike this morning's assessments, this exercise is not timed. Success is measured by mission completion with minimal casualties. Taking your time to plan and execute properly is more important than speed. Teams were given 20 minutes to plan their approach, study building schematics, and distribute equipment. Team C gathered around a table where Brennan immediately assumed an informal leadership role, his military background and confident demeanor making him the natural choice for coordination. Standard ascending clear, he said, spreading out the building plans. We take the ground floor first, establish security, then move up level by level. Rodriguez, you take point since you've got federal training. Sarah, you're second. I'll coordinate from 3rd position. He looked at Elena, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the planning session. Elena, you're going to hang back and provide rear security. Stay out of the way, keep an eye on our 6, and try not to get shot. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but the dismissive tone was clear. Elena was being assigned the role typically given to the least experienced team member, positioned where she could contribute minimally while learning from watching the others work. Elena nodded without comment, accepting the assignment with the same quiet compliance she had shown all day. She made no suggestions about the plan, asked no questions about the building layout, and showed no interest in examining the equipment that was being distributed among the team members. "Any questions about the approach?" Brennan asked, looking around the table. "We go slow and methodical. No heroics, no improvisation. We stick to the plan and trust our training." The other teams were finishing their planning sessions as well, their conversations reflecting similar approaches based on conventional tactical doctrine. Room-by-room clearing, coordinated movement, careful communication. All the elements that had been drilled into them through military service, law enforcement training, or private security courses. Marcus called for attention as the planning time expired. "Teams, you'll be entering through different access points and at 5-minute intervals. Team A goes first, then B, then C. Your performance will be evaluated not just on mission success, but on tactical proficiency, safety procedures, and team coordination." As Team A prepared for their entry, monitors throughout the observation area displayed their progress for the teams waiting their turn. The participants watched as the first group moved through the building with textbook precision, their communications crisp and their movement coordinated. They encountered their first hostile contact on the second floor and responded with appropriate fire and movement tactics, successfully neutralizing the threat while maintaining team integrity. Team A's progress was steady but slow, reflecting their commitment to thorough clearing procedures and careful advance. When they encountered a complex scenario involving civilians mixed in with hostiles, they took time to properly identify targets and coordinate their response. Their final mission completion time was just over 28 minutes, with one team member taking a hit during the final engagement, but all civilians successfully rescued. "Solid performance," Marcus commented as Team A emerged from the building. "Good fundamentals, appropriate caution, successful mission completion." Team B followed with a similar approach but slightly faster execution. Their military backgrounds were evident in their movement and communication, and they completed the scenario in 24 minutes with no casualties and all objectives met. Their performance drew approving nods from the observing instructors and established a benchmark that seemed to represent competent professional-level execution. As Team C prepared for their entry, Brennan gathered his teammates for a final briefing. "We've seen how this works now. Standard procedures, careful clearing, good communication. We know we can do this." He looked at Elena, who was checking her equipment with the same casual efficiency she had shown all day. "Elena, remember, stay back and stay safe. Let us handle the heavy lifting." Rodriguez tested his communication gear and reviewed his notes on the building layout. Sarah performed final checks on her protective equipment and weapon systems. Both of them moved with the confidence of people who had trained extensively for exactly this kind of scenario. Elena simply stood ready, her equipment properly fitted, but unremarkable, her demeanor unchanged from how she had appeared at the morning briefing. If she was nervous about the complex scenario ahead, she showed no signs of it. If she was excited by the challenge, that was equally invisible. She seemed to approach the exercise with the same quiet acceptance she had shown for everything else. Marcus gave Team C the signal to begin, and Rodriguez led them toward their assigned entry point on the ground floor. The building loomed before them, its windows dark and interior spaces unknown. According to the briefing, the structure contained multiple levels of increasing complexity, with hostiles and civilians distributed throughout in patterns designed to challenge even experienced operators. Rodriguez moved to the entry door with practiced precision, checking for traps or warning systems before signaling his team forward. Brennan coordinated their movement with hand signals and whispered radio communications, while Sarah covered angles, and maintained security. Elena followed at the designated distance, her role clearly defined as observer and backup rather than active participant. The ground floor contained a lobby area with multiple corridors branching off toward different sections of the building. Rodriguez began the standard clearing procedures, methodically checking each space for threats while the team advanced with coordinated movement. Their progress was careful and professional, reflecting hundreds of hours of training in similar environments. The first contact came in a side office where a role player representing a hostile had been positioned to ambush anyone moving through the main corridor. Rodriguez identified the threat and communicated its location to his team, and they responded with appropriate tactics to neutralize the target while maintaining their formation. "Good contact," Brennan whispered into his radio. "Threat down, continuing advance." Elena remained in her assigned position, contributing nothing to the engagement, but staying appropriately positioned for rear security. To any observer, she was fulfilling her role exactly as Brennan had planned, providing coverage while learning from watching more experienced operators work. The second floor presented a more complex challenge, with multiple rooms containing mixed scenarios of hostiles, civilians, and empty spaces. Rodriguez and his team worked methodically through each area, their clearing procedures thorough and their communication constant. When they encountered a scenario involving civilians being held hostage, they coordinated their response carefully to ensure no innocent parties were harmed. Elena continued to follow at the prescribed distance, her presence so unobtrusive that the team occasionally forgot she was there. She made no suggestions, offered no tactical input, and seemed content to observe while others handled the operational decisions. It was on the third floor that everything changed. The layout of the upper level was more complex than what the teams had encountered below, with interconnected rooms, multiple corridors, and sightlines that created overlapping fields of fire for any hostiles positioned throughout the space. Rodriguez paused at the top of the stairwell, studying the layout and planning their approach to the most challenging part of the building. As he prepared to move forward, the lights suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the entire floor in a dim red glow that dramatically reduced visibility and changed the tactical dynamics of every space they would need to clear. This wasn't part of the planned scenario according to their briefing, but sophisticated. Training facilities often included surprise elements designed to test adaptability under changing conditions. "Power failure," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "Switching to low-light procedures." Brennan acknowledged the communication and adjusted their formation for reduced visibility operations. Sarah activated a tactical light attached to her weapon system, its beam cutting through the red-tinted darkness. Elena remained in her position, apparently unconcerned by the change in conditions. They advanced into the first corridor of the third floor, their movements slower now as they adapted to the altered environment. The emergency lighting created shadows and blind spots that hadn't existed under normal illumination, and every room they needed to clear presented new challenges for target identification and safe zones of fire. Rodriguez had advanced perhaps 20 feet into the corridor when the first hostile contact erupted from a position that shouldn't have been occupied according to their building study. The role player's training weapon fired marker rounds that registered as hits on Rodriguez's electronic monitoring system, marking him as wounded and significantly reducing his operational capability. "Contact front," Brennan called out, moving to support his point man while Sarah adjusted her position to provide covering fire. The engagement developed quickly into a complex firefight with hostiles in multiple positions, their locations chosen to create crossfire scenarios that would challenge even experienced teams. Within minutes, both Rodriguez and Sarah had taken additional hits that registered them as combat ineffective according to the exercise parameters. Brennan found himself alone at the front of the formation, facing multiple hostile positions with his team reduced to Elena as his only remaining backup, "Elena," he called back toward her position. "I need you up here. Rodriguez and Sarah are down." Elena moved forward through the red-lit corridor, passing the positions where her teammates sat with the electronic systems, marking them as casualties. She approached Brennan's position without urgency, her movement through the space as quiet and fluid as it had been during her morning assessment. "What's the tactical situation?" she asked, her voice calm and conversational despite the simulated gunfire echoing from multiple directions. Brennan was crouched behind cover, his breathing rapid from the stress of the engagement and the realization that his carefully planned approach had fallen apart. "Multiple hostiles, unknown positions, and we still haven't located the civilians. This scenario is way more complex than what the other teams faced." Elena nodded as if this information was mildly interesting, but not particularly concerning. "Where do you think the civilians are being held?" "Could be anywhere," Brennan replied, frustration evident in his voice. "We need to clear every room. Systematically, but with just the two of us and these lighting conditions, it's going to take forever. And we're probably going to take more casualties." Elena was quiet for a moment, appearing to listen to something Brennan couldn't hear. Around them, the sounds of the scenario continued with periodic simulated gunfire and the movement of role players repositioning throughout the building structure. "I think I'll take a look around," Elena said finally. Before Brennan could respond or object, Elena had moved past his position and disappeared into the red-tinted maze of corridors and rooms that made up the third floor. Her movement was so quiet that within seconds he could no longer hear her footsteps or determine which direction she had taken. "Elena," he whispered urgently into his radio. "Elena, get back here. We need to coordinate our movement." There was no response on the communication channel. In the observation room below, Marcus and his staff watched the monitors with growing attention as Elena's electronic signature moved through the building in ways that defied their understanding of how the scenario was supposed to unfold. Unlike the methodical room-by-room clearing that had characterized every previous team's approach, Elena seemed to be moving through the space as if she knew exactly where she was going. "Is her tracker malfunctioning?" one of the assistant instructors asked, studying the display that showed Elena's position changing in ways that didn't correspond to the building's corridor layout. Marcus was reviewing multiple camera feeds simultaneously, trying to track Elena's actual movement through the structure. "She's not following any standard clearing procedures," he muttered. "She's not even checking rooms. She's just moving." On the monitors, Elena's progress through the third floor appeared almost supernatural. She moved past hostile positions without triggering engagement, navigated corridors without activating the motion sensors that should have alerted role players to her presence, and seemed to flow through spaces as if the architectural barriers didn't apply to her. Brennan remained in his position, trying to raise Elena on the radio while maintaining security for his compromised team position. Around him, the role players continued their assigned behaviors, but something in the pattern of their movement had changed. They seemed confused, uncertain, as if their carefully rehearsed scenario had been disrupted by something they hadn't trained for. The first indication that Elena had engaged hostile positions came not from radio communication or electronic hit registration, but from the sudden silence that fell over entire sections of the building. Role players who had been maintaining active movement and simulated gunfire simply stopped, their electronic systems registering them as eliminated despite the absence of any recorded engagement. Marcus leaned forward toward his monitoring station, his finger hovering over emergency communication controls as he tried to understand what his systems were recording. How was she eliminating targets without triggering contact protocols? On the building's second floor, two role players emerged from their assigned positions and approached the monitoring station that had been established for exercise oversight. "We need to check our equipment," one of them said, confusion evident in his voice. "The hit registration system says we've been eliminated. but we never saw the participant who supposedly engaged us. Similar reports began coming in from role players throughout the building. Electronic systems were registering eliminations, but the role players themselves had no memory of contact with Elena or any other team member. Their monitoring equipment indicated that they had been engaged and neutralized, but they couldn't identify when or how it had happened. Elena's progress through the building continued to defy conventional understanding. According to the electronic tracking systems, she was moving through walls, appearing in rooms without having passed through doorways, and engaging targets from positions that didn't exist according to the building's architecture. In less than 6 minutes, every hostile role player in the building had been marked as eliminated by the electronic monitoring systems. The civilian role players, who had been positioned in a secured room on the second floor according to a scenario design that should have required extensive searching to locate, suddenly reported that they had been found and were being escorted to safety. Brennan's radio crackled with Elena's voice, calm and conversational, as if she were calling to let him know she had finished running a simple errand. All clear. Civilians are secure and ready for extraction. You can bring Rodriguez and Sarah down to the exit. The silence that followed her transmission was profound. In the observation room, Marcus and his staff stared at monitoring systems that showed impossible results. In the building, Brennan remained crouched behind cover, trying to process information that didn't align with any tactical framework he understood. "Elena," he finally responded, "what's your position? Where are the hostiles?" "All neutralized," Elena replied. "The civilians are with me at the main exit." Mission complete. Rodriguez and Sarah, whose electronic systems still registered them as casualties but who were physically unharmed, looked at each other with expressions of complete bewilderment. The exercise that should have taken their team the better part of an hour to complete had been resolved in less than 10 minutes, apparently by the team member they had assumed would need protection and guidance. Marcus activated the building-wide communication system. "All teams, all role players, exercise terminated. Please proceed to designated exit points for debrief." As the building's occupants began moving toward the exits, conversations buzzed with confusion and speculation. Role players compared notes about electronic eliminations they couldn't remember experiencing. Team members tried to piece together a sequence of events that made no tactical sense according to their training and experience. Elena emerged from the building with the civilian role players, her equipment and appearance unchanged from when she had entered. She showed no signs of exertion, stress, or excitement. She had simply completed an assignment and was ready to move on to whatever came next. Brennan, Rodriguez, and Sarah found her waiting near the exit, sitting on a bench with her equipment properly secured and her messenger bag in her lap. She looked exactly as she had before entering the building, as if the previous 10 minutes had been a routine administrative task rather than a complex tactical exercise. "How?" Brennan asked, the single word carrying all the questions he couldn't formulate. Elena looked at him with the same steady gaze she had maintained all day. "The civilians were frightened," she said simply. "I helped them feel safer." It wasn't an answer that addressed any of the technical questions about her performance, but something in her tone suggested it was the only explanation she intended to offer. Marcus approached their group, his tablet displaying data that contradicted everything he thought he knew about building clearing procedures and tactical training. "Miss Vasquez, I need to understand what happened in there. The monitoring systems recorded results that don't match any standard tactical doctrine." Elena stood, shouldering her messenger bag with the same casual efficiency she had shown all day. "Is there another exercise this afternoon?" Her question carried the implication that she was ready to continue with whatever training the program had scheduled, as if the impossible performance they had all witnessed was simply routine preparation for more challenging scenarios. Marcus looked at his tablet again, then at the role players who were gathering near the debriefing area, then back at Elena. We're going to need to review the footage and system logs before proceeding with additional exercises." "All right," Elena replied. "I'll wait." She returned to her position on the bench, her posture relaxed and her attention apparently focused on something beyond the immediate environment. Around her, dozens of people struggled to understand what they had witnessed and recorded, but none of their questions seemed to reach her. The afternoon sun slanted through the facility's windows, casting long shadows across the debriefing area where teams gathered to discuss their performances. Team A and Team B compared notes on their systematic approaches and professional execution. Instructors reviewed footage and data logs, searching for explanations that aligned with their understanding of tactical operations. Elena sat quietly on her bench, waiting for whatever came next, carrying secrets that nobody else could begin to fathom. The building behind her stood empty now, its corridors and rooms reset for the next group of participants who would approach. Its challenges with conventional training and predictable methods. But something had changed in that space during Elena's brief passage through it, something that the cameras had recorded, but the observers couldn't explain. And Elena, unremarkable in her plain clothes and quiet demeanor, had demonstrated once again that she operated according to rules that existed beyond anything the tactical training community thought they understood. The conference room on the 8th floor had been designed for corporate meetings, not tactical debriefings, but its large windows and spacious layout made it the only space in the building capable of accommodating the unusual gathering that Marcus had hastily assembled. 3 teams of participants sat in clusters around the polished table, their expressions ranging from confused to skeptical to something approaching awe. The role players who had been eliminated during Elena's building clearing exercise occupied chairs along the windows, their body language reflecting the discomfort of professionals who couldn't explain what had happened to them. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his tablet connected to a large wall-mounted display that showed freeze-frame images from the afternoon's exercise. The footage revealed Elena moving through corridors with fluid precision, but the camera angles and lighting conditions made it difficult to track her exact path through the building. What was clear from the electronic logs was that every hostile position had been neutralized in a sequence that defied conventional tactical understanding. Elena sat at the far end of the table, her messenger bag in her lap and her attention apparently focused on the city skyline visible through the conference room windows. She had answered Marcus's initial questions with the same quiet directness she had shown all day, confirming basic facts about her movement through the building, while offering no explanations for how she had achieved results that seemed to violate the laws of physics and tactics. "Let's start with the role players," Marcus said, consulting his notes. "Jake, you were positioned on the 3rd floor, northeast corner room. According to your electronic monitoring, you were eliminated at 14-30-7 hours. What do you remember about the engagement?" Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was a former Army Ranger who had been working as a training instructor for 3 years, with hundreds of scenarios under his belt and a reputation for challenging even the most experienced participants. "That's just it," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "I don't remember an engagement. One minute I'm holding my assigned position, maintaining noise discipline and watching my sector. The next minute my equipment is showing me as eliminated, but I never saw anyone. Never heard footsteps, never had visual contact, never took a shot." Marcus nodded and turned to another role player. "Maria, you were covering the main corridor approach. Same timeline, same result. What's your account?" Maria had spent 12 years with federal law enforcement before transitioning to private training. Her experience included hostage rescue operations and high-risk warrant service, scenarios where situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. "I was watching my assigned area through night vision enhancement due to the emergency lighting conditions," she said slowly. "My sector included the primary approach route that anyone advancing through the building would have to use. I maintained continuous observation for the entire duration of the exercise. She paused, her expression reflecting genuine bewilderment. I never saw anyone pass through my area of responsibility. But at 14-30-8, my monitoring system registered an elimination from behind my position. When I turned to check, there was nobody there. No movement, no disturbance, nothing to indicate anyone had been in the space. Similar accounts came from the other role players positioned throughout the building. Professional instructors with decades of combined experience described impossible eliminations, equipment malfunctions that weren't actually malfunctions, and the growing realization that their understanding of tactical movement didn't account for what they had experienced. Brennan leaned forward across the table, his military bearing intact, but his confidence clearly shaken. I was coordinating our team's movement through the building. Elena was assigned rear security, which means she should have been behind our formation at all times. When Rodriguez and Sarah took casualties, I called for her support. He gestured toward Elena, who continued to gaze out the windows as if the conversation didn't concern her. She said she was going to take a look around. I assumed she meant she would advance to my position so we could coordinate our next movement. Instead, she just disappeared. I lost all contact with her, and 6 minutes later she reports mission complete with all hostiles neutralized and civilians secured. Rodriguez spoke up from his position near the windows. I've been through similar scenarios in federal training programs. The building layout, the hostile positioning, the civilian rescue component. This was designed to challenge a full team working with coordinated tactics. Even if everything went perfectly, a single operator should need at least 20 minutes to clear that structure. Sarah nodded in agreement. The sight lines alone make it impossible to engage multiple positions without taking return fire. We studied the building schematics during our planning session. There are corridor intersections where anyone advancing would be exposed to crossfire from multiple angles. Simultaneously, Marcus pulled up a detailed floor plan on the wall display, highlighting the positions where role players had been stationed and the routes that conventional tactics would require for systematic clearing. According to standard doctrine, this building would require a minimum team of 6 operators to clear safely. The hostile positions were specifically chosen to create overlapping fields of fire that would force any advancing team to use coordinated movement and covering fire. He traced possible movement paths on the display with a laser pointer. Elena's electronic tracking shows her moving through the structure in ways that don't correspond to the building's physical layout. Her position indicators suggest she passed through walls, appeared in rooms without using doorways, and engaged targets from positions that don't exist according to the architectural plans. One of the assistant instructors raised her hand. Could there be an equipment malfunction? Some kind of interference with the electronic tracking systems. Marcus had spent 2 hours that afternoon reviewing every piece of monitoring equipment. In the building, all systems functioned normally. We verified the calibration on every device, reviewed the software logs, and tested the network communications. The equipment recorded exactly what happened. The silence that followed was heavy with implications that nobody wanted to articulate. Professional soldiers, law enforcement officers, and security specialists were being forced to consider possibilities that existed outside their training and experience. Elena finally turned her attention from the windows to the room, her gaze settling on Marcus with the same steady composure she had maintained throughout the day. "Is there a question you need me to answer?" Her voice carried no defensiveness, no pride in her accomplishment, no awareness that her performance had challenged everything the other participants believed about tactical operations. She seemed genuinely curious about whether there was something specific she could clarify. Marcus consulted his tablet, then looked directly at her. "Miss Vasquez, your results today are unlike anything we've recorded in 5 years of operating this facility. The individual assessment this morning, the building exercise this afternoon. Your performance suggests training and capabilities that go beyond anything in conventional tactical doctrine. Elena nodded as if this observation was mildly interesting but not particularly significant. We'd like to understand your background, Marcus continued. Your training history, your experience with tactical operations, the source of your capabilities. I told you this morning, Elena replied. I'm here to learn. The simplicity of her response only deepened the mystery. Brennan leaned forward again, his frustration evident. You can't learn to move like that. What you did in that building isn't something you pick up in civilian self-defense classes or weekend tactical courses. That level of performance comes from years of specialized training. Elena considered his statement for a moment. What kind of training do you think it comes from? The question turned the conversation back on itself. None of them could identify what kind of training would produce Elena's capabilities because they had never seen anything like her performance before. Torres, the former Marine, had been quiet throughout most of the debriefing, but now he spoke with the careful precision of someone working through a complex problem. I've seen operators from every branch of the military, federal agencies, and allied special forces. Different training programs produce different capabilities, but they all follow recognizable patterns. He gestured toward the building floor. Plans still displayed on the wall. Movement techniques, engagement procedures, communication protocols. There are variations, but the fundamentals are consistent across all professional training programs. What Elena demonstrated today doesn't fit any of those patterns. Maybe she's had training we haven't been exposed to, suggested Davis, the former police officer. Foreign military programs, or some kind of classified development that isn't widely known. Marcus had considered similar possibilities during his equipment reviews that afternoon. Miss Vasquez, have you received training from military or law enforcement programs outside the United States? Elena shook her head. No military training. No law enforcement training. Private instruction? Specialized civilian programs? No. The definitiveness of her answers eliminated the most obvious explanations for her capabilities. If Elena had no formal tactical training, then her performance raised questions that nobody in the room was equipped to answer. One of the role players spoke up from near the windows. Maybe we should focus on what we actually observed rather than trying to explain it. Jake and I were discussing our experiences during the break, and we noticed something consistent across all the eliminations. Marcus turned his attention to the instructor. What did you notice? None of us felt threatened. I know that sounds strange, but during a normal exercise, even when you're playing the role of a hostile, there's an edge of simulated danger. You're engaged in combat scenarios, tracking targets, managing stress responses. Today was different. Jake nodded in agreement. It was more like, I don't know how to describe it, like falling asleep during a peaceful moment. 1 second I was alert and maintaining my position. The next second I was eliminated, but there was no transition between those states. No moment of contact or engagement. Maria added her perspective. In real operations, even when you're taken by surprise, there's usually some awareness of threat, some indication that you've been engaged. Today felt like the opposite. Like being eliminated was the peaceful resolution to a situation I didn't realize I was in. The descriptions offered no tactical explanations, but they provided insight into an aspect of Elena's performance that the electronic monitoring systems couldn't capture. Whatever methods she had used to neutralize the role players, they had involved something beyond conventional engagement techniques. Elena listened to these accounts with the same quiet attention she had given everything else throughout the day. When the conversation paused, she spoke again. You were all very professional. You made the exercise realistic. It was a simple acknowledgement of the role player's performance, but something in her tone suggested she understood exactly what they had experienced even if she wasn't prepared to explain how she had created those experiences. Marcus made a decision that would have significant implications for Vanguard's training programs. "Miss Vasquez, I'd like to offer you a position as a specialized instructor. Your capabilities, whatever their source, represent something unique that could benefit our advanced training programs." Elena considered the offer with the same thoughtful silence she had applied to every other decision that day. Around the table, participants and instructors waited for her response, aware that her answer might provide insight into motivations and goals that had remained hidden behind her unremarkable appearance. "I'm not qualified to be an instructor," Elena said finally. Marcus disagreed immediately. "Your performance today demonstrates qualifications that go beyond anything we typically see from applicants with extensive professional backgrounds." Elena shook her head. "I don't have anything to teach. I'm still learning." The humility in her response was genuine, not false modesty or tactical deflection. Elena seemed to sincerely believe that her extraordinary capabilities didn't qualify her to instruct others in tactical operations. Brennan found this impossible to accept. "You cleared a building that should have been impossible for a single operator to handle. You neutralized multiple hostile positions without taking casualties or apparently even engaging in conventional firefights. If that's not instructor-level performance, then what is?" Elena turned her gaze to him, and for a moment her expression carried something deeper than the surface calm she had maintained all day. "Do you remember the feeling you had when you realized your team had taken casualties?" The question caught Brennan off guard. "What do you mean?" "The moment when you understood that Rodriguez and Sarah were down and you were alone with a mission that seemed impossible to complete. What did that feel like?" Brennan thought back to those moments in the red-lit corridor, when his carefully planned approach had fallen apart and he faced the prospect of mission failure with potential consequences for the civilian role-players they were supposed to rescue. "Responsible," he said slowly. "Responsible for my team, for the mission, for people I couldn't see but knew were counting on us." Elena nodded. "That feeling is what I'm here to learn about. How to carry responsibility without letting it become fear. How to act when the conventional approach isn't sufficient. How to help people without needing them to understand how the help was provided." Her explanation offered the first real insight into her motivations for attending the Vanguard program, but it also raised new questions about what kind of preparation she thought she needed for situations that would require such capabilities. Torres leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're talking about leadership under extreme circumstances. Command responsibility when normal procedures don't apply." "Yes," Elena replied. "That's what I need to understand better." Marcus realized that he had been approaching the conversation from the wrong direction. Instead of trying to understand Elena's capabilities, he should have been focusing on what she hoped to accomplish by developing them further. "What kind of situations are you preparing for?" he asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the windows and the city beyond. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen possibilities that others hadn't considered. "There are places where people get trapped," she said slowly. "Situations where normal rescue procedures aren't sufficient. Buildings that are too dangerous for conventional teams to enter. Circumstances where the only way to help is to go in alone and bring people out safely." The room fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the participants. Elena wasn't training for tactical operations in any conventional sense. She was preparing for scenarios where conventional tactics would fail and where her unique capabilities might be the only resource available to save lives. Davis spoke first, his voice reflecting newfound respect. "You're talking about disaster response. Situations where buildings are structurally compromised, or where chemical hazards make it impossible for traditional rescue teams to operate safely." Elena nodded, among other things. Sarah had been quiet throughout most of the debriefing, but now she leaned forward with interest. That's why you didn't use conventional tactics in the building exercise. You weren't approaching it as a combat scenario. You were treating it as a rescue operation where the priority was getting to people who needed help. The role players were doing their jobs, Elena acknowledged. But the civilian actors were genuinely afraid. They needed someone to help them feel safe. This perspective reframed everything the participants thought they had witnessed. Elena's impossible movement through the building, her non-confrontational elimination of hostile positions, her focus on civilian rescue over tactical engagement. All of these elements made more sense when viewed as advanced disaster response, rather than combat operations. Marcus found himself reconsidering his understanding of what Vanguard could offer someone with Elena's goals and capabilities. Our program is designed for tactical applications, but the principles of building clearing, team coordination, and mission planning are relevant to rescue operations as well. Elena agreed. That's why I'm here. I need to understand how teams work together when individual capabilities aren't sufficient. How to coordinate with people who have different training and different approaches to problem solving. The assistant instructor, who had been silent throughout most of the debriefing, finally spoke up. You're saying that what we saw today, that's just one application of capabilities you're developing for civilian rescue scenarios? Elena considered the question carefully. I can help people in situations where conventional approaches don't work, but I can't replace the knowledge and experience that professional teams bring to complex operations. I need to understand how to work with people like you when my individual capabilities need to be part of a larger coordinated response. The conversation had evolved from interrogation to consultation, with Elena's unique perspective informing the participants' understanding of their own roles in emergency scenarios. The tactical professionals began to see their skills in a broader context, as components of capability sets that might be applied to situations they had never considered. Brennan nodded slowly, his earlier skepticism giving way to genuine interest. You're talking about hybrid operations. Scenarios where military or law enforcement tactics might be combined with specialized rescue capabilities to handle situations that neither approach could manage alone. Exactly, Elena replied. And I need to understand how to integrate my contributions with conventional teams without compromising their procedures or putting anyone at unnecessary risk. Torres stood up and walked to the wall display, studying the building floor plans with renewed interest. If we approach that same exercise as a rescue scenario instead of a tactical scenario, what would the planning process look like? Elena joined him at the display, and for the first time all day she engaged actively with the tactical discussion. The civilian positions would be the primary consideration. Everything else would be secondary to getting them out safely and quickly. She traced alternative routes through the building layout, her finger following paths that none of the conventional teams had considered. The hostile positions were obstacles to overcome rather than targets to engage. If you can neutralize them without creating noise or prolonging contact, the civilians experience less trauma and the operation completes faster. Maria approached the display as well, her federal law enforcement background providing perspective on operations that balanced tactical necessity with civilian protection. That's consistent with hostage rescue protocols, but taken to an extreme level. Minimal engagement time, maximum civilian security. Elena nodded. Speed becomes a safety factor for everyone involved. As the afternoon progressed, the debriefing evolved into an impromptu seminar on advanced rescue operations, with Elena's unique perspective informing discussions about scenarios that none of the participants had encountered in their professional training. The questions shifted from skepticism about her capabilities to genuine curiosity about applications they had never considered. By 5 o'clock, when Marcus finally called an end to the extended session, the atmosphere in the conference room had changed completely. Elena was no longer the outsider whose presence raised questions about program standards. She had become a source of insight into operational possibilities that expanded everyone's understanding of what tactical training could accomplish. As the participants gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, conversations continued in small groups throughout the room. Elena packed her messenger bag with the same efficiency she had shown all day, but now her movements were observed with respect rather than dismissal. Brennan approached her as she prepared to leave. "Elena, I owe you an apology for how I handled team assignments this afternoon. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on appearances rather than performance." Elena looked at him with the same steady gaze that had characterized all her interactions throughout the day. "You were protecting your team and trying to ensure mission success. That's exactly what a good leader should do." Her response carried no resentment or judgment, only recognition of the responsibilities that Brennan had been carrying and acknowledgement that his decisions had been made with appropriate priorities. Rodriguez joined them near the conference room exit. "Will you be continuing with the program for the rest of the week?" Elena nodded. "There's still a lot for me to learn." Sarah overheard the conversation and added her perspective. "I think there's a lot we can all learn from each other. This afternoon showed me approaches to tactical problems that I never would have considered." As Elena left the conference room and walked toward the elevators, she was no longer alone. Small groups of participants accompanied her. Their conversations focused on operational scenarios, training methodologies, and the potential applications of capabilities that existed beyond conventional tactical doctrine. Marcus remained in the conference room with his assistant instructors, reviewing the day's events and considering their implications for Vanguard's training programs. The monitoring data from Elena's exercises would require extensive analysis, but the more significant impact might be on how the facility approached the relationship between individual capabilities and team coordination. Elena rode the elevator down to the lobby with Torres, Davis, and two of the role players who had been eliminated during her building exercise. The conversation continued as they walked toward the building exit, with Elena answering questions about decision-making under extreme circumstances and operational prioritization when conventional procedures weren't applicable. At the building entrance, the group paused as participants prepared to head in different directions toward their hotels, rental cars, and evening activities. Elena stood among them, no longer the outsider whose presence had been questioned that morning, but not quite an insider either. She occupied a unique position as someone whose capabilities had redefined what the group understood about tactical operations while maintaining the humility of someone who genuinely believed she had more to learn than to teach. "Same time tomorrow?" Brennan asked, the question directed at Elena, but carrying implications for how all of them would approach the remaining days of the program. Elena nodded. "I'll be here." As the group dispersed into the Detroit evening, Elena walked toward a nearby metro station, her messenger bag slung across her shoulder and her movements carrying the same quiet confidence that had characterized her presence throughout the day. Behind her, conversations continued among participants who were reconsidering their understanding of tactical training, rescue operations, and the relationship between individual capabilities and team effectiveness. The city around her hummed with the activity of people moving through their evening routines, unaware that somewhere among them walked someone whose presence that day had challenged the assumptions of some of the most experienced tactical professionals in the country. Elena emerged into the flow of commuters and pedestrians, unremarkable in her plain clothes and quiet demeanor, carrying capabilities and perspectives that existed far beyond anything the conventional training community thought possible. Tomorrow would bring new exercises, new challenges, and new opportunities for Elena to learn about coordination, responsibility, and the complex dynamics of working with professional teams whose approaches differed fundamentally from her own methods. But tonight, she had already accomplished something more significant than demonstrating her abilities. She had shown a room full of skeptical professionals that their understanding of what was possible needed to expand, and she had done it without raising her voice above a whisper. The evening air carried the sounds of traffic and distant conversations as Elena disappeared into the metro station, leaving behind a training facility where instructors and participants would spend hours that night reviewing footage, analyzing data, and trying to understand what they had witnessed. But the most important lesson of the day couldn't be captured by monitoring systems or analyzed through conventional frameworks. Elena had reminded them that true capability often comes in forms that don't announce themselves, that the most profound demonstrations of skill might look like nothing more than quiet competence, and that sometimes the person who seems least qualified to be there is exactly the person everyone needs to learn from. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.